3, 2,
We are
and
now.
1.
Okay, thanks. All right, so Commissioner-Gretchen, here you are.
Here I am.
And you know all of us. And I'm
I
going
do.
to ask you the question to start this off. What is it about this job that makes you willing to and want to do it again for another couple of years?
I guess I'll start off by saying that this job, not quite 4 years ago, I came here in July of 17, not long after the governor was elected. And I think I told you then, or it would have been the following winter, that I enjoyed working in public policy, and I enjoyed finance, and so I found them to be a very good mix. I will acknowledge that the job requirements have shifted quite substantially in the past year, and the commitment, both in terms of time and I just think in terms of intensity, have changed dramatically. But that, for me, hasn't taken the enjoyment out of it. I would say that it's still, a job that I enjoy, and I wouldn't call myself a people person, but I enjoy working with other people for a common cause in the administration and with the legislature. So I frankly look forward to another couple of years of service. But going back to what I said earlier, it's a good combination of kind of public policy and finance, and I enjoy that.
Great, thanks. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Adam. Good to see you. So of the 3 other folks we've talked to today, who are the other administration officials that are going to appear before government operations, you're the only one that's a former legislator.
Right.
And I'm kind of curious, I assume, as we each in this room have an opinion of the administration, different people, what they do, kind of like the good part, the bad part. Has anything shifted for you once you became a member of the administration? Do you now look back at the legislature and say, oh, I know what's going on over there?
So that's actually a fascinating question.
Well, thank you.
I will harken back to a conversation I had actually with a former colleague and chair of Ways and Means, who I know Senator Clarkson and Senator Rahm both know very well. And I remember years ago talking with her, and she, as you're aware, worked in the executive branch for, I believe, Governor Dean. And she made a comment to me at one point offhandedly. She said, working in the executive branch really helped educate my work as a legislator. And I thought that was interesting. I, put it in my pocket and didn't think as much about it until years later when I joined the administration. And I realized that, I knew this kind of academically all along, but there is 3 branches of government, and there are differences between each of the branches. And I remember as a legislator thinking, gosh, the executive branch, they've just got such a kind of an advantage over the legislature. They're there all year. They've got, a bunch of people, departments they can draw on. They've got a lot of expertise. It's very difficult to kind of, on a knowledge level and even a legislative level, keep up with them. And now that I'm in the executive branch, it's a little bit of the grass is always greener, and that you look at the legislature and say, gosh, in terms of decision-making bodies, you've got these committee structures, which for better or for worse are often very well set up for bouncing ideas around and looking at very different angles. You all come from different areas and different philosophical viewpoints. That can be a very powerful decision-making body, an idea-generating body. And in addition, you have the resources, for example, the Joint Fiscal Office, Legislative Council. And so I've caught myself almost looking with envy across the pond, say, at the, in the State House. But I would say that as a legislator, it has very much educated my opinion on the executive branch. I think it's very helpful to have an experience facing voters. I can't emphasize enough how kind of experience forming that is. And knowing that there are, hundreds, thousands of people out there with opinions, and that the legislative body has to go back to them, and that they're supposed to be representing them. Now, I realize the governor too is representing them, but I can tell you that it's helped educate the work I do and kind of my viewpoint on working with the legislature. It's been, I wouldn't trade it for anything, really. It's been very helpful.
I appreciate that answer a lot, Adam. And I can remember when you were in the House. So you've seen both sides of it. It is sort of, I don't know if it's strange to me. It makes me kind of puzzled sometimes when I'll hear a constituent say, those people in Montpelier, they did this or they did that. And I know that that person is meaning the legislature because we're the ones that make the laws. But oftentimes it's the administration that, executive branch is in charge of carrying out those laws. And I think for a lot of folks, the focus is always on the governor and whether he or she has done the right thing by us. But I've always wanted to ask that question. And I wonder, and you've gone from legislature to executive, and I assume the person you mean, I think, is still in Ways and Means, and went the other way. And I often wonder whether there's a difference between which journey you took first. But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Senator Clarkson?
Well, thank you. I had 2 years ago the pleasure of speaking on Adam's behalf in front of the Senate. And the biggest challenge you faced then was retention.
Yeah.
And you spoke to us a real concern about being able to keep the people in your office that you valued and that were trained and had years of experience. And retention was, I think, the biggest challenge you faced. And I'm just curious how you're doing on that. How is the retention problem in your office? I know you trained good people and who was that? I think that was me somehow, but I don't know how it happened. But anyway, it was like a pop-up call. Anyway, who knows? I have no idea what that was. Sorry. So I'm just curious, how are you doing on retention? And do you see fewer people being poached after you've trained them?
So that's another interesting question. When I arrived in July of 17, there were, a full contingent of budget analysts that work in our office. There was no deputy commissioner. There was no budget director. And in between that time and now, there is a different budget director. There's a new budget director, Hardy Merrill, who joined 6 months ago. There's a new deputy commissioner, Ethan Latour, who replaced Matt Riven. And every analyst but one is turned over. However, having said that, I will say the analysts, the new hires are now almost 3 years at in the longest tenure, and 1.5 years in the shortest tenure. And they have not left. They've remained with us. And to me, that is a success. I will say, however, that typically people, the time frame for job movement, job maturity, say, is 3 to 5 years. And in a small department, it's very challenging to keep people because we're small. We just don't have that many avenues to go. And so, that's going to continue to be a challenge, but I'm happy to say the analysts that we have hired, every one of them that we have hired since I've been there is still with us. But I just want to be sober about it. And instead of patting myself on the back and saying it's all me, I just want to say that I think a lot of them have spent the time coming up the curve. They're now very strong. In fact, interestingly enough, I've started to bring them with me, and a number of them have started to testify because they're really the experts in their field. But having said that, I will say that someone who has looked at budgets across various departments, and our analysts are assigned, typically they choose, but we make sure we divvy up all the agencies and departments in government, and they take assignments and they follow those departments. So, after doing that for a couple of years, you become pretty darn good at knowing what's going on in a lot of different areas of government. And that makes you a very attractive candidate for business offices. What I will also say, though, is, whereas to me, it would be a bit of a challenge when you've trained someone and they move on. To state government, it would be an unequivocal success. If people move from finance and management into, agriculture or human services and stay with state government, I think from, the global picture, that's a success. You want people to spend time in state government. You want them to stick around. You want them to build their expertise. So, whether or not they end up in our department long term, I think as long as they stay in state government, it's a win-win for all of us.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Senator Rahm?
Commissioner, I asked a similar question of our Secretary of Administration, but we're getting a lot of one-time money. How would you measure the success of our deployment of that one-time money?
So, well, first, from purely a budgetary standpoint, what you want to do is use one-time money for either unique projects or large projects or the like that don't require continual reinforcement. You want to use one-time money for one-time expenses. But the kind of the symbol or the thought that I always have when looking at this money is you can still today drive across a bridge in Vermont or pass a building in Vermont that was built in 1927, after that flood where large parts of the state were seriously damaged. And, a lot of money was deployed, both federal and state, predominantly federal, and, the state was patched together. And that's lasting. Those are things that you can hold and I always think in my head of bringing hopefully my grandchildren at some point around and saying that thing right there, whatever it is, was built with, after the pandemic. And that was kind of the silver lining. So I think the success is, can we make strategic investments that will be lasting? There's always, and I say that knowing that we never have enough money in our base budget to do all the things we want to do. I get that, but I think the success will be, can we make investments that are lasting, that we'll be able to point to in years that go by and say that was from the pandemic, and that helped. Some obvious examples of that we've thought of both in the administration and I know legislatively they thought of is, for example, bringing broadband to everyone. That will be lasting. Years from now, we'll look back on that and say, that was done during the pandemic. Another great example of that would be kind of building new and updating old housing stock, so that Vermont will have more housing, more affordable housing. So those would be, in my view anyway, measures that we could point to say, that was a good strategic investment. And I hope we have the horsepower and the advocacy, both in the executive branch and the legislature, to get that.
Can I just ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So I think it's one thing to say more broadband, more housing, but would you want there to be some kind of metric out there for how much or how much better?
I think the metrics would be developed before we come out with proposals. But yes, absolutely. Everything we do, we want to be measurable. So you would have to say that, I don't know what the metric would be, for example, for housing. But I would say that you would need to have measurable goals that you're trying to achieve before you, stick your first dollar into the project.
Senator Polina?
Hi, Adam. I'm wondering, you build budgets for a living and, we look for certain outcomes from our budgets, but I'm wondering what parts of the state budget and maybe the state's economy do you feel keeps you awake at night, is most troublesome or weakest link in terms of challenges that we face and being able to balance our budget and make the investments we need to make?
So historically and currently, I can give you a couple of examples. Within our human services area, we have one area in particular we call general assistance that I'm sure you're quite familiar with.
Sure.
And this is an area that helps the most of the most vulnerable. These are the most people who need a lot of help. It's been very challenging to fund it on a regular basis. Prior, to the pandemic and prior to all the federal money, we were struggling to keep up with the demand. And that is one area of the budget that is clearly troubled. And I know that Children and Families has had proposals. I know the legislature has had proposals. And I think, interestingly enough, many people have said if you had to look for a couple of silver linings to this whole thing, one of them is that we've been able to put a roof over the head of every person who has needed it. But the troubling aspect of it is we know that what we've done is not sustainable. We need to figure out a way to make it sustainable. So that has always been troubling to me. In past years, our spending on Medicaid has also been troubling. Interestingly enough, I think that over the past years, the trend has been our friend in that regard. In that part of it, I believe, has been that we've kind of looked at the all payer model and the accountable care organization we've created in OneCare that I think has helped bend the curve a bit. But it's early years on that. We don't know that for a fact. But it does seem as if our Medicaid spending is moderated, in part due to the growth in the economy, in part to, I think, to the way we've approached the provision of healthcare. But that too has been a very challenging area of our budget that we're still trying to get a handle on. I want to be clear. I mean, having all this, it's been very. It's been a challenge to become accustomed to when I first started here in the first few years, kind of squeezing and pinching and coming out with balanced budgets. It seems to have totally changed now. Now we have, two very large and very good federal packages that have come in, and suddenly we have, our problems are how do we deploy the money wisely as opposed to how do we have enough money to deploy. So it's very different, but some of the old problems that you asked me to refer to earlier still remain.
So I am curious, you are developing budgets and working with people to develop the budget. You're looking at kind of the whole state and the whole state budget. And how do you, and maybe this isn't a problem, but how do you approach commissioners or secretaries in other agencies who really disagree with your budget analysis of what they need?
So yeah, that's always a challenge. And what we do at first, and typically it's usually the last few days of August, first few days of September, we send out budget instructions. And those instructions are educated by goals that the governor has given us, and by revenues that we know we have available through the consensus revenue forecast. And we ask for their submissions back to us. And in those submissions, we ask them to include all of their wants, and they do. And we put them together, and then we go speak with the governor and his staff, and we make recommendations to them about what we think are advisable. And ultimately, it's the decision of the governor. He's got the biggest picture of all. We try to educate his opinion and do the best we can to lay out all his options, but ultimately, it's up to him to decide what he wants to emphasize and what he wants to de-emphasize. And that's a challenging decision, as always. But I look at myself as trying to give him all the options and make recommendations, but ultimately it's his decision to make.
Thank you. Senator Clarkson, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, you spoke about silver linings, and there have been some amazing silver linings to COVID, and they come really around the lessons we've learned. And so I'd like to ask you, what are the lessons learned from your area in your department? What are the lessons learned that you're going to come out of the pandemic with having learned?
There's one lesson that probably won't surprise you and one that might, but the one that won't surprise you is I've learned that there are many different ways of achieving the same result. And by that, I mean specifically heretofore in, 35 years or so of working in various endeavors, I've always viewed work as the kind of thing where you either hop on your bike or start out walking or get in your car and you go to your office. And I've been amazed, really, and I know that I'm not the only one, but I'll state it for you. I've been amazed at how you can, within a matter of a week, flip that around. So much so that there's going to be, I think, a real challenge figuring out where we want to go when the all clear sign comes out. That's going to be a challenge for state government. As you're aware, we have a very large footprint statewide. I mean, I couldn't believe actually how much just land and buildings the state owns. I mean, it's unconscionable. If you're ever interested in to see, Jennifer Fitch, the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, has a chart that shows you all the different holdings. Now, not all of those are office buildings and desks and computer hookups, but a lot of them are. And certainly in Montpelier and Waterbury, and in Burlington, actually. So, what I've learned from that is that there are many different ways to achieve the same work result. It's been, for my department anyway, it's been extraordinarily successful working remotely. And I think one of the challenges is going to be decide how we want to go forward. I'm well aware that there are many folks in my department and within the agency of administration, frankly, that are very happy doing what they're doing at work. I would say what I've learned that I think surprised me a bit more is how much capacity there is to do more if you have to. I mean, I always thought I was pretty busy and my department was pretty maxed, but there's some energy there, there's some reserve there that I simply didn't anticipate. I mean, the old saying is you get much more done when you're busy. And that really proved to be the case. And I think a little troubling to me, frankly, is you can't operate at this level forever. So I think there's been some burnout. I think there's been, some issues that we've had to deal with. But I just didn't, I learned that there's a fairly decent reserve you can tap into, I would argue, over the short term. But that was a surprise to me. So.
We just have to make sure we don't keep tapping into that on and on and on and really wear people out.
Yeah. Well, you guys have shared that. I mean, yeah, you're in it too.
Yeah.
I know, and we're all sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So any more questions for the commissioner?
Well,
Well,
may I just ask one last one, which is sort of a softball, but last time you were so specific when I asked you what you were proudest of. You said you were so proud of getting a handle on the internal service fund. And I'm wondering if you have something else like that you're really proud that you've sort of tackled and feel much better about now that because you were still sort of newish at that point, but now you've been in it for a while, you're starting your 5th year. Like, what are you proudest of? What have you?
Actually, I would say, I would have gone there again, but I would say that the improvement in our balance sheet, it's not just internal service funds. We paid off some loans that also, I think, have been very, just kind of stuck out there as not advisable on our balance sheet. And we've also reduced our borrowing trajectory so that our balance sheet looks quite a bit cleaner. And ultimately, that's what I pass along to the guy or the woman who succeeds me. And so I am proud of that. I do think, that's kind of the not so glamorous work that you do on a daily basis. But, at the end of the day, I think you're measured by what you pass on to your successor. And so my hope is that, we'll be able to stay the course. It's a good question, though.
I like that attitude about what you pass on to your successor, because we see it in towns and schools all the time that we put off a lot of maintenance.
Yeah.
And that's what we pass on to our successors, which is not the right thing to do. But so any more questions or comments? Well, thank you, Commissioner.
Good to see you.
And
Nice to catch up with you guys.
okay, go run off to your next meeting.